Hey, I think we're ready to start. So, welcome everybody to our Meet the Winners of the 2023 Einstein Foundation Award for Promoting Quality in Research, which, unlike most scientific awards, does not primarily honor the most excellent or original research, but rather efforts and ideas to make research as relevant and reliable as possible. My name is Ulrich Dirnagl. I'm a stroke researcher at the Charité. I'm the director of the Quest Center at the Berlin Institute of Health, and I'm the scientific secretary of this award. Before we turn our attention to the winners of the third installment of the award, the first one was given out in 2021, just a few words about the award. The Einstein Foundation Award is endowed with 500,000 euros annually by the DAMP Foundation and supported by the state of Berlin. We have prominent partners in raising awareness for the award and its topics. Nature and PLOS support us in the global and discipline-spanning establishment of this prize. The Max Planck Foundation and the Berlin University Alliance, as well as the Quest Center, all support its implementation. The award is presented in three categories: to individual researchers, institutions, and early career researchers. Awardees are selected by a prestigious international jury of researchers from various disciplines. Now, just for housekeeping, if you are in the audience and if you would like to ask questions to the winners, we would be very happy if you do that. And so you just post them in the chat, and I'll be delighted to post them then to the winners after the interviews that we will have. Please also note that we will record this session. But before we will have a kind of a small interview session, I would like to introduce the winners and give the winners the opportunity to give us short statements on their quest. And I would like to start with Yves Moreau. Yves Moreau is a bioinformatician and professor of engineering at Katholische Universität Leuven. He is the winner of the Individual Award in 2023, and the jury selected him because, and I'm quoting, he forcefully advocates for ethical standards in the utilization of human DNA data in research and privacy-preserving analysis of clinical genetic data in the age of artificial intelligence and big data. Dr. Moreau, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I first would like to express my deep gratitude to the Einstein Foundation, the DAMP Stiftung, and the State of Berlin and their partners for the Individual Award. And through my work on genomic surveillance and on human research ethics in academic publishing, I have concluded that while ethical guidelines and regulations are essential, they need to be grounded in a culture of ethics and social responsibility. Otherwise, they come to be seen by researchers as obstacles that need to be circumvented. Engineers like me often lack the basic tools to think through the social and political implications of the decisions and their choices. The utopian narratives that dominate tech culture are too naive and simplistic for the challenges of the 21st century. To give a concrete example, the idea that technology is morally neutral is a widespread fallacy in the tech community that strongly contributes to moral disengagement. Tech people must take more responsibility in how their work impacts society, and the current shockwave around generative AI makes this need even more pressing. I will use the award to help foster an ethical culture of digital humanism in the tech community, which weaves technology with ethics, law, philosophy, sociology, political science, and so on. Our STEM students crave for better intellectual tools to face a challenging future. The whole tech community also needs those tools. I will leverage the award to contribute to the development of open access educational tools, from teaching materials to online videos that address key concepts, historical figures, and ethical dilemmas in digital humanism. I will deploy networks and communities that build stronger bridges between STEM and social sciences and humanities and involve members from both sides. I will also contribute to building a stronger European voice in the AI debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Institutional Award 2023 went to the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences, in short, BITS. And it is represented by Edward Miguel, the director of this initiative, and by Carson Cristiano, executive director of BITS. The jury selected this institution because it's, and I'm quoting again, leading a transformation in the worldwide research culture by advocating for rigor, reproducibility, and openness in social scientific practices. BITS achieves this through educating open science practice, building digital infrastructure, conducting meta-research, and translating open science practices to policy analysis. Edward Miguel, please.
Thank you so much. I want to start by expressing how incredibly grateful we are to the Einstein Foundation, the State of Berlin, and other supporters of the award for this recognition of the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences and our community and work. We started here in California in 2012, and we've been led from the start by a multidisciplinary team that's believed that the bottom-up change of norms and practices is possible and can, in a short amount of time, improve the credibility of social science research. In particular, over the last decade, we've developed new infrastructure and policies to support a sustainable open science ecosystem. We've trained thousands of rising social scientists across the 5 continents in open science tools and practices, with a particular focus on outreach to low and middle income countries to make sure that practices are truly global. We've also generated novel evidence on the problems and potential solutions relevant to scientific credibility, and in recent years have extended that work into the policy domain to advance the same ideals in policymaking as are being advanced in scientific research. My BITS colleague, Carson Cristiano, will now provide some illustrative examples.
Thanks, Ted, and thanks so much to the Foundation and the committee. I'm Carson Cristiano, the Executive Director of BITS. So over the last year, BITS has invested a lot in digital infrastructure that enables open science at scale. So we have what's called the Social Science Reproduction Platform. We have another tool called the Social Science Prediction Platform that enables the crowdsourcing of priors of social science research. And we have Meta Archive, which is an interdisciplinary preprint service. We also offer many open science trainings, which have now reached more than 1,300 social scientists. They cover things like pre-analysis plans, ethical data management, open publishing, and reproducibility. We've also built a global catalyst network that includes over 150 scholars in 30 countries, including, importantly, low and middle income countries. So we support Catalyst to then conduct trainings themselves, and they've reached over 4,000 students over the years. We believe that our work has contributed to real and measurable shifts in research practices. So measuring these shifts is part of what we do at BITS. We just this year released findings from what we called the State of Social Science, or 3S survey, which found that over 80% of social scientists have now pre-registered a study, shared data, or shared survey instruments, which is up from only 25% in 2009. So we're really honored to receive this award and excited to see what's next for BITS and the open science community.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to present Anne Gärtner. She's a postdoc at Dresden University of Technology and the winner of the Early Career Award of 2023 for her initiative Responsible Research Assessment, which, as the jury stated, tackles a key issue in the ongoing credibility crisis in science, prioritizing quantity over quality in criteria for funding, hiring, and promotion. The project aims to develop criteria that will acknowledge and incentivize rigorous research practices and has potential to provide a model that can be used across multiple academic disciplines. Dr. Gärtner, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very honored to have been selected as this year's winner of the Einstein Early Career Award. And I, of course, also want to state my deep thank you to the Einstein Foundation and the Quest Center in Berlin and all the supporters. To the background of the project, the background is that the number one factor in appointment procedures is the number of publications, of peer-reviewed publications, or other quantitative indicators, also like journal H index, like journal impact factor, or the age index of a researcher. Those indicators are used to assess research performance, but these indicators are only loosely connected to research quality. They might even foster a publish or perish culture and leading to problems with replication and reproducibility. That's why we need a shift in the incentive structure and reward research quality more in academic assessment. That's why the project aims to develop valid, reproducible, and non-proprietary indicators for research output assessment that can be used in appointment procedures, but also can be used for funding, for hiring, and promotion decisions. These new indicators shall be provided in a ready-to-use, free and online assessment tool that can be used by committees in psychology and also beyond. Yeah, again, thank you very much for the recognition.
Thank you very much. And I will now hand over to Patrick Forscher. He's the director of the CREAM meta-research team at Busara Center in Nairobi. Patrick was among the finalists of the inaugural Early Career Award in 2021. And we are now excited that he agreed to lead the discussion with this year's winners. Patrick.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I wanted to start off the this interview section just by noting that the measurement of research quality is probably one of the most fundamental problems in the history of science, at least by my read. But one of the features of the winners of this awards that I've noticed in the 3 years that the award has been going on so far is that many of the awards are motivated by this idea of noticing a gap between how quality is assessed and or maybe even our conceptions of quality as a research community and what it should be. So I thought it might be interesting to start out the interview section just by asking each of the winners for this year to talk about, well, what does research quality mean to you? And how does your project seek to expand our conceptions of quality or perhaps narrow the gap between our indicators of quality and what you think quality really ought to be? And maybe we could start with Anne. I'll give each winner a chance to talk about each of their statements, but as we go through the interview, of course, we can have a more fluid conversation. So Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So quality, research quality, for me, it is related to the use of several practices related to methodological rigor or that try to enhance methodological rigor. For example, doing pre-registrations, open data, open material, open code, formal modeling of theories, and all that is related to transparency and reporting science in a transparent way and also trying to be reproducible. There's also a recent study showing that doing these practices or applying these practices in research can increase replicability of our findings up to 90%. So it really shows that it matters to use those practices. But I think they are not rewarded sufficiently until now, and that's why the project aims to help to shift the incentive structure to science that rewards doing those practices related to methodological rigor or transparency and so on.
Great, thanks, Anne. Carson and Ted, what does research quality mean to you, and how does that inform BITS?
Thanks. I'm happy to start off, and then Carson, please jump in. I really appreciated Anne's answer and feel like there's a real alignment in many ways with her answer, and that traditionally in our fields in the social sciences where BITS tends to work, there's been such a focus on the outcome, the headline finding of research, and too little on the process by which we got there. And actually, this also links to Yves' work. The notion that there are certain steps we can take that make the research more credible, that make it sounder, that make it more ethical, are really central to our mission at BITS. And those are things that, as Anne said, there's increasingly evidence that they do produce research that is more credible. So I think for us, going through the right steps ethically in a transparent way are critical to our understanding of credible and integral research.
I would just briefly add that the inclusivity of the research is really important to us at BITS, and I think, you know, who's setting the agenda, who's designing the research studies themselves, and, you know, who's getting airtime, who's getting published, whose findings are disseminated. And so we've tried really hard to ensure that our trainings and the platforms that we're developing are inclusive of especially scholars from low and middle income countries, but also many other groups of underrepresented researchers.
Thanks. And Carson, I especially resonate with that last point, given that I work at a nonprofit research center headquartered in Nairobi. So I'm glad that you highlighted that. Yves, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so of course, reproducibility is the foundation of science. So we need to get the answer right as much as we can, and all improvement in that directions are absolutely essential. I think my perspective, there's a little bit of a twist or a shift there, which is we also need to get the questions right. And of course, you know, quality of research builds on integrity and builds on ethical research, and you can get the answer right, but if the question is problematic, then what was the point, and what's the resulting quality of that? So I think that, of course, we need to approach the problems from all perspectives, and I think that there are different ways we can contribute, and my perspective has been more about, what questions are we asking, and what is the foundations for asking questions that are acceptable in certain fields. Of course, there are fields with less problematic questions and other fields with more problematic questions.
Thanks, Yves. And I also resonate with that point. I've noticed that many of the winners or finalists of the Einstein Award have tried to complicate our conceptions of what quality is, either by including more people in or trying to include more people in the research process, or by considering other aspects like ethics. And I'd say even though reproducibility itself is a topic that, you know, has gained a lot of prominence as being central to quality, that too was complicating the narrative about what quality research is. So I really appreciate those points. Okay, for my next question, I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about your vision for the impact of your projects or your organization in the case of BITS. So just imagine that you succeed in your aims beyond your wildest imagining. So all of the obstacles disappear and everything is smooth, and you've achieved your goal. In this scenario, what does science look like maybe in about 10 years? And how is that science different from the way science currently operates right now? We can maybe go in opposite order this time. Yves, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, so a very, very interesting question, and of course it's going to be an uphill battle the next 10 years, I'm sure. But what I would like to see fundamentally change is the basic narratives of STEM fields, which really are too simplistic. And it's kind of weird because in the social sciences and humanities, many questions have been studies that would really help us move forward. And I always have this big dragon, I mentioned it in the introduction, that technology is morally neutral. We know, I mean, since decades ago, that this is not a good way to look at the problem. And the attitude of people in the tech community are really centered around this simplistic narratives. So if we could change those narratives, basically, these people, including me, are at positions where we are making decisions on an everyday basis about what the world will look like. And so rather than basically from the top down imposing a certain view about what to do and what not to do, rather disperse knowledge and culture so that people ask themselves much more questions. I mean, if you're outside the STEM, in particular engineering, I mean, it's probably the worst field, you would not realize how few questions people ask about what they do in terms of their impact on others, on society. So changing the narrative dramatically would actually leverage changes in society in very powerful ways, because currently they're not leveraged at all. We are living in a non-culture or a culture of simplistic utopian narratives that we need to change, because this is the 21st century and the challenges ahead are massive.
Thanks, Yves. And you know, as I mentioned, I've worked at an applied behavioral science nonprofit, and I'm faced with this gap between research as it exists and the heads of scientists and the impact that I would like it to have all the time, and in particular, the lack of attention to how the findings are used or even what's relevant to people on the ground. So thanks for highlighting that. Carson and Ted, so the question is, BITS succeeds in its aims beyond your wildest imagining. What does that look like, say, 10 years from now, and how would that be different from the way science currently is?
I love this question. I'll start and then I'll let Ted jump in. So, we've worked really hard to open up the scientific research process, but we also think a lot about how those findings are used. And so, obviously there's still a lot of work to do with the research community, but we're also very tuned into, the fact that the policy analysis process and the process of basically taking findings and turning them into a policy that may actually affect millions of people, that it remains a black box. And so we're hopeful that, 10 years from now or in the future, if we're successful in, getting researchers on board with the tools and practices that will make their research sound, and then also extending that work to the policy community through what we're calling open policy analysis, that the insights being used for very consequential decision making will be credible as well. Ted, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I'll just mention two other things that in our wildest dreams we would accomplish. And these are things we're working on very actively at BITS. We've been, at the start of BITS, one of the things we focused on was advancing pre-registration and pre-analysis plans, which in the social sciences were kind of unknown 10, 12 years ago. And a lot of progress has been made, but there's still an area where there needs to be a lot more progress, which is there's a lot of pre-registered studies that still don't fully report their findings. There's still studies that are registered and then findings disappear to the community. So one of the things we've been working on is trying to understand the extent of that issue and figure out ways to promote full reporting. So I would say that's a very specific objective, but one that could really make progress on publication bias in the social sciences. And then the second, very briefly, we've established, as Carson mentioned, the social science reproduction platform, which aims to crowdsource computational reproductions of empirical work in the social sciences. And there's already hundreds of reproductions on there. Our dream within 10 years would be that every empirical study in the social sciences is computationally reproduced by the community and documented in a public way so that we can assess its validity. And so that's something where we're just making progress now, and we hope within 10 years we could go all the way there.
Yeah, I love that future, and I think there are some interesting parallels between Carson's comments about making the policy process more open so that these decisions that impact so many people are at least inspectable, and Yves' comments about encouraging people to consider those impacts in the first place, and broadening people's conceptions of research in that way. Ian, how about you? So the question again is, your project succeeds beyond its wildest imagining. What does that look like, and how does that vision of science differ from the way science currently exists?
Yeah. So my vision is related especially to the perspective of early career researchers, because I'm as well an early career researcher. And the dream would be that we are incentivized to do good and probably also slow science, or at least more slow science, so that the focus is really on the product that we have and that we get recognition for doing good science. So yeah, and not just lots of science, lots of funding and more. So the dream is also that people will be selected and assessed according to the research quality that they provide. And yeah, I hope that there will be also changes in the policy, whom to hire and whom to get who gets the funding in the end. So to get researchers on board that do really good science. And so science as a whole will also become better if we have the people there who do good science and not just lots of science.
Yeah, I love that vision too. I think not that far away from being an early career researcher. I mean, I think I still count that way. And so I remember that struggle, and I definitely resonate with that. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit to start to think about the barriers to achieve that vision that you just articulated. And one of the issues that I've noticed in research on research or research improvement is that it's much easier to spot flaws in the way science exists than it is to figure out, well, how do you tweak the system so that you can eliminate those problems or at least mitigate them. So for each of you, what do you see as the biggest barrier to the success of to achieving that vision that you just articulated? And do you have any strategies in mind, or have you put in place any strategies to try to overcome that barrier? Maybe this time we can start with Carson and Ted.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to jump in. I think the existing norms in a lot of our fields aren't really consistent with a number of things we've all been saying about our vision for the future. And that's part of why we're here. We're here to change norms and practices. I would say, the central thing that at BITS we've tried to do to change norms is to reach early stage researchers, up and coming scholars from around the world, and give them a different vision. And I think, it's a vision very similar to what Anne and Yves have been talking about, a vision of science that's grounded in the right processes, the right questions, doing things the right way. And our hope and our thinking about how to overcome inertia and how science is done is to train the next generation in a different way of doing things and have them go out into their fields and change norms. So really from the start of BITS, from day one, we decided on this grassroots attempt and to bring training into our programming as central, thinking that if the next generation changes, then science will change. So I think that's our hope for the future.
And I think sort of related to the point I made earlier, we're very aware of the ways in which, introducing new standards and norms could serve as barriers to researchers who don't have access to things like training or the tools that they need to, make a pre-analysis plan or the time. And so I'll, refer back to the inclusion comment and say that, the more we can make sure that our trainings and tools are available to a broad and diverse audience, the more successful we think we'll be.
Yeah, and that emphasis on training really shows through in the programming provided by BITS. And in fact, I think some people at Busara have been recipients of both the Catalyst Award and some of your trainings, and they've been really quite helpful. So thanks for that. Anne, how about you? So name what one barrier, the biggest barrier that you think to achieving your vision, and do you have any strategies in place for mitigating that barrier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we need a change in the incentive structure, but I think the barrier is that the system is very slow, or that, people don't really want to see a change in a running system, or it might be difficult to foster change in the running system because maybe people stick to the old system or like to stick to the old system because it's running. And so I think possible solution might be to really reach out to all people involved and to try to reach all of them that should contribute to the change. So to get multiple status groups involved, for example. We can also see some change on the student level, because you mentioned teaching before. I can also see that the way how science is taught to students changes. And so I think it's important to involve all of those groups, but also in my case, the professorships or professors, for example, or postdocs, but also doctoral students, that all are able to contribute their own piece to the change. And we really might come up with a collaborative account there.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So some more emphasis on this idea of involving people with multiple stages in their career, and both reaching the newer generations of researchers and the people who already hold the power. So thanks for that. Yves, how about you? So one barrier for your project or projects, and what are your thoughts on strategy for overcoming that barrier?
Yeah, so I would say there are two main barriers. First of all, the limits to the culture in some of the STEM fields. It's actually a bit more complicated than just say STEM in general. There are, you know, actually features, not bugs. There are actually a culture of non-culture that built over centuries because of social structures and power relations in society, that was actually favorable to have them develop in this way. So that is a very heavy heritage to deal with. Some fields, for example, just take chemistry. People realize from the beginning of the 20th century that stuff blows up. Around World War II, that chemical weapons kill people in very nasty ways, and then they go through actually a shock and some soul searching. And medicine had the Tuskegee experiment, for example. I think there we're maybe not in as bad a position, but I think we're going through the same soul searching with the explosion of AI. I think that is a moment where people realize things are different now. We need to reconsider how we deal with the world. Another key challenge is that we're facing super strong narratives, some very dominant figures who do not have always the most balanced narratives. But I mean, not, you know, some Silicon Valley billionaires are actually pushing simple ideas about the world that are just not realistic. And so these are huge obstacles. So we have to be realistic about what we can achieve in the short term. But I think there are two key aspects. One is indeed, we are going through a shock with AI. It's everywhere in the news. Everybody realizes that business as usual is over. We need to think a little bit. And just the news about OpenAI and the conflict inside OpenAI, I think, is a perfect illustration of that. The other key leverage is younger scientists. I mean, I'm already a little bit older. I finished being a young scientist a couple of years ago, I guess. I've grown up in a different culture than actually my students. And when I listen to my students, I'm very hopeful that they actually are open to a much more nuanced view of what they do in the world. They just lack the tools. And so if we provide those tools, they'll be able to do a lot of amazing things with those.
Yeah, Yves, I was trained as a research psychologist, and I think it's not a coincidence that many of the people who are most active in research improvement have that training, because psychology went through that very same kind of shock that you were just talking about. And I actually was hoping to ask you a follow-up question, but anybody else who wants to take this could jump in afterwards. And that is, what do you think are the key ingredients for that kind of shock that you're talking about? And then second, how can we ensure that we use those shocks well, that they become not just a crisis, but an opportunity to improve the state of affairs?
That's a tough question. So I think that the shock is really when your practice gets reflected upon society, and you get this image back that, what is happening, guys? Well, what have you brought onto us? And often it's in narratives that are extremely disturbing. I mean, if you think about the Tuskegee experiment as one of the milestone in the evolution of ethics in medicine, while this is a nasty story, sometimes it's very powerful narrative. So if you take like psychology, well, you know, the key experiment, like the Stanford prison experiment, and you can have long discussions about exactly what they meant. But these scientific events turned into narratives that force the community to reflect upon itself. And so I think that is really a key element, to see this image pushed back to you from society. You know, just having to talk to your neighbor or at the family dinner table and have people ask you, okay, what do you think about that? And you cannot anymore just say, oh, it's all going to be super cool. You know, at some point somebody will ask, well, what about my job? You know, what, you know, I'm an artist, a graphic artist. You know, what's my future? You know, once you're confronted with that, then suddenly you have to reconsider. Don't remember the second part of the question.
Yeah, it was, how do we turn crises into opportunities, and what do you think are the key ingredients to these?
The big challenge is that we have to balance the doom view with a constructive view, and it's kind of easy to fall into the doom narrative, especially if you take AI, existential risk. I signed those letters about existential risk because I think they need to be considered, but it turned very quickly into doom scenarios that also have an effect on shutting down a bit the reflection, because then everything is bad and we don't do anything anymore. So how do we, and I'm not sure about the answer there, so maybe I'd be happy to hear what other things think. There we have to watch out on taking those crisis moments and then saying, this is time for reflection to change our practices. I mean, if you take reproducibility into science, it was exactly that. There is a crisis, but let's turn that into an opportunity. I'm not entirely sure how we would do it in my case, but I think this is this balance between the fear and the hope that we need to reach.
That's great, Yves. Thank you for humoring me. Did anybody else want to take this question? How do we turn crises into opportunities? If no one else has, oh, go ahead, Ted.
I was just going to say very briefly, I think that the research community is in a better position to do so maybe than before, precisely because there are so many more organizations and institutes and foundations focused on issues of research credibility. So again, I think 10 or 15 years ago, at the start of the reproducibility crises, and at least in a lot of our fields, as when we were hit with that shock, it maybe wasn't immediate what to do. But I think because of foundations like the Einstein Foundation, the other awardees, the folks on this Zoom, the community has some infrastructure in place to respond, to understand these issues. We have some memory of related crises across disciplines. So I do feel like the community is stronger in that way. Just a thought.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. And I agree, by the way. So I wanted to close with, there are many different other barriers that we could talk about, but I wanted to close with some discussion of a barrier that's very close to my heart that Ted and Carson alluded to before, and that is, science is extremely international and also extremely decentralized. And it extends not just to the developed world, but also to low and middle income countries like Kenya, where Busara is headquartered. So I wondered if each of you could offer some reflection on, or have you given any thought to the way your projects might accommodate low and middle income countries in particular. Maybe we could start with Carson and Ted, since you've already discussed this a little bit.
Go ahead, Carson, and I'll jump in.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're thinking a lot right now about how we can, a big barrier to getting low and middle income country scholars to our research transparency and reproducibility trainings has just been funding. And so we're looking for ways to sort of build open science trainings into, every year we host a big conference in East Africa. Can we include an event on the sidelines that would make it easy for African scholars to sort of join in? Can we create more online resources? I mean, time zones are difficult, but the Catalyst program that I mentioned earlier allows us to sort of outsource and decentralize the training to African scholars themselves. And we have many members of the Catalyst network are based in Africa and other low and middle income regions. And so we're very excited to see them, conducting trainings in their home institutions. I don't know, Ted, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I share that vision. I think, Patrick, you're touching on such a key issue. And I'll just say very briefly that we hope that, some of the resources enabled by this award will do exactly that, will actually lead to more inclusion of scholars from low and middle income regions in our programming and really advance scientific rigor globally. So we're, again, super grateful to the foundation for those resources, because sometimes at the end of the day, resources are just what we need to have that impact. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think I already mentioned that we Joel on my team is the recipient of a BITS Catalyst Award. So I'm very grateful for that. And it really did help expand awareness of open science in Busara. And do you have any thoughts on this question? So, science is international. Do you have any thoughts on how you could accommodate that, especially for scholars in low and middle income countries with your project?
Yeah, I mean, the project and the tools that we want to develop, they are aimed to be or will be openly available, open access. So everyone in the world will be able to see the criteria that we want to develop and the online tool that can be used by hiring and promotion committees. And I think the project will help in the way that at least until now, my feeling is that assessment of a researcher or of research is also closely related to the amount of funding, just the simple amount of funding. And I could imagine that we here in Germany and other Western countries, we have high amounts of fundings when we apply for certain positions, and others will have a disadvantage when they apply in Germany, for example, for a psychology professorship here, when they have less funding, but related to that, they have less funding there at home. And I think if we use those criteria here, where it's more focused on really methodological rigor, I think everyone should be able to do good research, and trying to reward those good research practices should give them a benefit who do good research, regardless of the funding that you have, because you can also do good research with quite less funding, depending on the field where you're working in. So I think the shift in the focus will also help those people to get to be more inclusive, with those groups.
Funding surely is bound up with the power structures in science. So I resonate with those points. Yves, how about you? So this will be the last part of the planned questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so indeed, I mean, there, for example, in the fields that I'm most interested in, like mass surveillance, there is an impossibility to reach, worldwide regulations. This is simply not going to happen. We also have to acknowledge that there are differences in value systems across the world. So in a sense, the focus on culture there actually partly accommodates that. It's not a perfect solution. I mean, of course, you'd like to come to some kind of a global consensus about what is good, what is bad, but we never arrive there, and we will never. So we have to maybe be a bit more flexible and say, well, different groups of people will actually build, value systems, and from there regulation and cultural norms that are slightly different, and the world will move forward as the resultant of wills, to use an old term. And so there, I think that this culture, by forcing people to reflect and ask themselves questions and give them the instruments to talk with each other, that we will come out of non-culture, as I call it, to actually have everybody express what they value, what they think is important, how they want to consider things. This will certainly not lead to some kind of global consensus. And there we'll have to live with that and move forward as best as we can. And over time, maybe we can progress even further. So I think there, the notion of culture, the needs across the world are not the same. So obviously it's easier in a European country to start worrying about certain aspects, let's say if you think sustainability, and you say, well, let's just shut everything down. And while in other countries, there are very pressing daily needs that still need to be addressed. And so accepting that the world is a big place and that not everyone needs to do the same thing, but giving everybody the tools to make their own decision in a more consistent and coherent manner, I think that can really help us all forward.
Yeah, the science is extremely decentralized, so I resonate with those points of the need for a flexible approach. That's the end of my prepared questions. I see that there are some questions in the chat. Ulrich, did you want to hit those?
Yeah, so first, thanks, Patrick, for brilliantly moderating this extremely interesting discussion. I guess a few questions were stimulated by it in the audience, and I would like to read them to you. So Sheena Fee Barchera asks, and I think this is a question that specifically is addressed to Carson and Ted. With a field as diverse as the social sciences, how do you guarantee that your vision of good reproducible science benefits the entirety of the social sciences and does not end up marginalizing qualitative research and therefore mainly non-reproducible findings?
Thanks for that question. It's a super important question, one that's been on our mind and is often discussed in BITS meetings. In the research we've done that's documented adoption of different practices, awareness of open science, research transparency practices, you're completely right that there's a really big divide between quantitative and qualitative social scientists. And on the quantitative research side, there's been much faster adoption of a lot of new tools and methods. Right now at BITS, we've been trying to expand the influence of these ideas into qualitative research. I personally have been working with a sociologist to think about these issues. We wrote a textbook together that tried to bring some in. And I think there's so much more to be done on qualitative research. And I think if we think creatively, we can bring a lot of the same principles into qualitative research, even if the tools are different. But I think you've put your finger on a big gap. And again, even in the data we've collected, there is this big gap in adoption. And we want to make sure it isn't the case going forward. So thanks for that, for noting that.
And there's another question by Martin Greisel, and it goes to Anne Gärtner. And the question is related to the question about crisis. Which are the main incentives for appointment commissions to overcome inertia and implement the criteria you are developing, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think, or I observe, at least at the moment in appointment procedures, that the work there focuses on collecting numbers and indicators, often in Excel files and so on. And I think this is a rather annoying work to do. And I hope that by applying those indicators and also the process that is recommended on how to use those indicators and a two-step process that we recommend, then hopefully there will be less annoying work, but more time to really go into the work of the candidate, so that we want to, or the indicators can be used to reduce a long list of about 100 applications for one professorship job to a short list. And when we have a short list, then we will be able to read a paper and to see whether he or she does a good pre-registration. So the indicators are more like, did they ever do a pre-registration? But of course, those indicators can also be gained. And we need more time to really go into the research and also assess innovativeness again. And yeah, the fit to the appointment or to the job offer. Yeah, and I hope that this will also benefit the appointment committees to really have time to go into the research of the candidate.
Thanks. And there's a question, and I can't see by whom it was posed, but the question is an open one to anyone who wants to give a stab at it. And the question is, I thank you all very much for your great efforts for making science more credible. Yet we have seen that more than one progressive movement has been hijacked. So my question is, how can we reliably create safeguards against, e.g., publishers' efforts to exploit all these efforts to just capitalize on it? Who wants to address this question? I think it's an important one. It's happening right now.
I can take a stab because it's really something that's very close to my work. I think it has already happened. I think part of, let's say, the research integrity mantra in publishing is partly something real and partly something rather hypocritical. I mean, I'll not mince my words. And so that capture has partly already happened. Open access is another place where we are in a very strange situation. So I think there are very powerful players, and those players, they indeed try to control whatever trends is happening. And indeed, in particular for me on research integrity and ethical research, I really feel like we have the right instruments, we have the right ethical principles, and then I'm confronted with situations where it is impossible to actually get to a solution, because that probably plays against, commercial, industrial incentives of publishers. I think we're already there, and so it's not just avoiding, it's trying to open up that and get a little more freedom back.
So time is running out, and we have to sort of wind down, but there's one last question. I'm afraid it's directly addressed again to Yves Moreau. So the last question and the last answer goes to you. It comes from Thorsten Wilhelmi, and he asks a question from an administrator. What is the role of funding organizations in order to raise awareness? Aren't we overstretching our role once we try to evaluate research questions along your lines that are not yet settled within the disciplines?
Yeah, so I think the first of all, funding organizations have made a lot of progress in all kinds of directions during the past couple of years. There's a lot more boxes we have to tick than 20 years ago, and I think it's all relevant and well intended. I think, how do we address and make that all efficient, in terms indeed of reproducibility, accessibility of and openness of research, research integrity, ethical research. I think their funding organizations are trying really quite hard. What can they do? I think for me, it's actually having a good process, and it will be the same thing for editors and publisher, of trying to catch problematic research early on and then deliberate on it. I'm not expecting, ethical problems are not problems like the problems that I deal with usually, that we are searching for the solution, a correct solution. These are deliberation processes that end up with some kind of decision. But if you simply were able to identify when there is a problem, then have a deliberation, take a decision and stand by the decision, and not everybody will be happy every time, that would already be quite useful. I would really love to not just have ethical questionnaires filled, but let's say reviewers of proposal send it back and tell the funder, there is an issue here, please ask for more advice, and then report about it, and then take a decision and stand by your decision.
Okay, so thanks again. Special big thanks to all the winners for sharing their views, and again, a big shout out to Patrick. I think did a wonderful job in moderating this interesting conversation. And of course, special thanks go to Ulrich for preparing the event that we had today. In 2024, we'll be introducing a diverse set of new members to our jury panel, representing a variety of disciplines, global regions, and career stages. And the next call for applications and nominations will be open in January for the 2025 award. As our esteemed jury member Marsha not aptly put it, those who do not apply, are not nominated, cannot win a prize. Therefore, we invite all of you to spread the word, and we look forward to many new applications. Just to finish up, if you want to find out how the award has already made an impact, stay tuned for a short film on the progress of the Early Career Award winning project from 2021, which we will screen just after I've said thanks again and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you've ever interacted with a baby, you know that they are very noisy creatures that are easily distracted by all kinds of other things in the environment. Babies are just doing their thing, and that kind of makes them fascinating research subjects.
Infants can't tell you what they're thinking. They can't press a button to choose one thing versus the other. what Many Babies 5 is based off of, this idea that their gaze or where they're looking can give you information about what they're attending to, what they might prefer to look at. It's a large-scale global investigation of the different factors that drive infants' curiosity and their exploration of their visual environment.
How complex is that visual thing that I'm staring at as a baby? How many different pieces does it have, for example?
How does the amount of familiarization or the amount of experience with an object influence infants' attention to that object? How does infants' age influence how long they'll look at a familiar object versus something novel? And then we connect with researchers around the globe, and we all, run the same study, test the question in the same way, and then we kind of examine stability and differences across labs around the world.
Do they also apply to infants growing up in Europe, in Africa, in Australia? That's sort of the idea.
So I'd say what has motivated me to look at the reliability of research is that I started graduate school in 2011, so about the time that there was a lot of attention on what was called the reproducibility crisis, this idea that there are psychological research findings that maybe aren't replicable.
We want to trust that when we get a certain result from an experiment, that's a result that is repeatable, that describes a true thing that's happening. How do you go from this little blob, to making all these complex decisions, reasoning processes? There's a fascination just in the puzzle.
When I first started Many Babies, I was very nervous about getting involved. On a whim, I answered an email and said, yes, sure, I'd like to be part of Many Babies, and started working with the consortium. So the advice I would give to early career researchers is don't be afraid to jump in and try something new. The best decisions I made in graduate school was sending that one email.
The award allowed us to think big, try to reach out more broadly beyond the existing researcher network.
I think it's important to have awards like the Einstein Foundation's awards because it really conveys to the field how important and valued this kind of work is. It allowed us to do things like to create the stimuli for the project, which are not only going to be useful for this particular project, but will also be shared and will be a resource for the field of psychology more broadly.
I think it also makes the work better to be able to share our ideas, think together about and build a consensus around the best ways to answer the questions we all care about.